If you haven't heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Completely free. I love free. I'm sure you love free. So that should be motivation enough. But the cool thing about it is, it allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And now, back to the show. This is Enchanted Ink. Welcome to the show. Today we're learning about Greek mythology, old religions, ancient gods. I just love hearing how ancient civilizations rationalized the world around them and explained the things that they couldn't understand. Before modern science and astronomy, we had the gods creating the seas and mountains and pulling the sun across the sky. And I honestly don't remember when I got into Greek mythology. I definitely learned about it mostly from school, but I always tried to catch media around it because it's cool. And I did watch a lot of Xena and Hercules growing up, so I at least was very familiar with the monsters, if not so much the gods. But in this episode, we'll be discussing Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Book 1, The Lightning Thief, by Rick Riordan. And we'll get to see how the 12 Olympians get by in the modern world. So first of all, where did Greek mythology come from? If you said Greece, then you're correct. Ancient Greece is a civilization that existed from around the 8th century BC, so the time of Homer and the Odyssey, to the 6th century AD. And it's known for so many amazing contributions that we still celebrate today in art, philosophy, politics. They gave us the Olympics, democracy, you name it. And Greek poetry and theater are still studied in schools around the world. Now, you've heard me mention the Odyssey in pretty much every episode up until this point, but that's because it's so important to the origins of fantasy and most other mythology that we see in modern day. But it is considered an epic poem, and poetry was the earliest Greek literature, and it was always intended to be performed. It's what ultimately evolved into plays. Notably, the tragedy, and then a little bit later, the comedy. So that symbol that you always see that symbolizes theater or the arts, the two masks, one smiling and one frowning, they're called the sock and buskin, and they're named after the types of shoes that the actors wore on stage during that time. Or they're sometimes called Melpomene and Talia, after the muses of comedy and tragedy. But anyway, yeah, that's where they come from, ancient Greece. But one of the most famous, standout influences is the architecture. Their cities, like Athens and Sparta, had marketplaces and separate armies, and they were revolutionary for their time. So a lot of their most famous monuments are not only still standing, but you can still visit them today, including the Parthenon. And for those who don't know, the Parthenon was /is, I guess, a marble temple dedicated to the goddess Athena. So even if you think you've never seen it, you probably have. It's a traditional Greek temple with the rounded white column. You know what? It looks like the Lincoln Memorial. The Lincoln Memorial is modeled after it. So go look at the back of, a $5 bill, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And anyway, I bring this up just because we're talking historical context and Greek architecture is still celebrated and imitated in the modern day. But one of the best things that the ancient Greeks left us with are their stories. They stood the test of time. The Olympians have such detailed and complex legends, and that's what Rick Riordan uses as the foundation of the Percy Jackson series. Percy Jackson is a good kid, but he can't seem to focus on his schoolwork or control his temper. And lately, being away at boarding school is only getting worse. Percy could have sworn his pre-algebra teacher turned into a monster and tried to kill him. When Percy's mom finds out, she knows it's time he knew the truth about where he came from. She sends him to Camp Half-Blood, a summer camp for demigods, where he learns that the father he never knew is Poseidon, god of the sea. Soon, a mystery unfolds, and together with his friends, a satyr, and the demigod daughter of the goddess Athena, Percy sets out on a quest across the United States to reach the gates of the underworld and prevent a catastrophic war between the gods. All right, so we just set the stage. When we get back from the break, we find out who the Olympians are.
This iTunes Top 5 album is out now.
I put a spell on you, yeah, 'cause you're mine.
Featuring epic brand new pop anthems and classic big band hits.
You won't admit you love me.
From me, British singer-songwriter Shane Hampshire.
Your side, let the rain fall down on me.
Search for Shane Hampshire's debut album, available to stream now.
Okay, so as a Long Island girl, I was so excited when I first read this book because Camp Half-Blood is on Long Island, and evidently on the North Shore since it overlooks the Long Island Sound. But it was fun for me to catch the little references that Riordan makes about the train and the city and stuff like that. We just don't get a lot of shout-outs in modern literature, I feel like. So yeah, that was a sidebar. But anyway, at the beginning of the book, we see Percy at school, and he's just not great academically. The only subject that he does reasonably well in is Latin, and that's partially because of his bond with his teacher, Mr. Brunner, who mysteriously pressures him to learn his Greek mythology. Ultimately, Percy finds out that his best friend from school is actually a satyr, he's a demigod, and Mr. Brunner is the centaur Chiron, former trainer to Hercules. It's also at Camp Half-Blood that we're introduced to the other demigods and their parents, the Olympians. And actually, let's take a quick step back because I never defined demigod. They are the half-human children of the Olympians, hence the name Camp Half-Blood. And at the camp, they're all separated into different cabins depending on who their parent is. So the Ares cabin, the Athena cabin, and so forth. But it's worth noting that the cabins of Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades are empty. They're just there for ceremonial purposes because those three gods decided a long time ago to stop having demigod children because they were just too powerful. Or so everyone thought until Percy shows up. Oh, but real quick, before we get into that, I want to first introduce Percy's friend Grover. Grover is a satyr, meaning half man, half goat nature spirit, and he's the protector of demigods, just like Phil in Disney's Hercules. Traditionally, the satyrs are the companions of the god Dionysus, and they live in the forest, which is semi-true of Grover because he lives full-time at Camp Half-Blood. But I just wanted to introduce him now because A, he's a main character, and B, I don't know if we're going to need him later. So let's look at the 12 Olympians and their powers. Actually, no. I originally wanted to cover all 12, but I see already that that would take too long. So we're making this a two-parter, and we're only going to cover 6 today. But for context, the 12 Olympians are the major gods of Greek mythology that control the forces of nature. First and foremost, we have Zeus. Zeus is the god of the sky, lightning, thunder, and justice. He is the king of Mount Olympus, which is where the gods live. And his symbols are, traditionally, the lightning bolt and the eagle. And it's his lightning bolt, the master weapon, that gets stolen in this book, hence the name. So according to the legend, the lightning bolt, the master bolt, was the first weapon made by the Cyclops for the war against the Titans that ultimately brought the Olympians to power. There is so much lore around Zeus that we just don't have time to get into, but the important things to note are that he's the head god and considered the most powerful after defeating the Titans. He's the son of the Titan Kronos, along with Poseidon and Hades, aka the Big Three. And he was a legendary playboy who fathered most of the other gods, demigods, and heroes within Greek mythology. Next, we have Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, and horses, randomly, and the father of Percy Jackson. Traditionally, he's considered one of the most bad-tempered, greedy gods, but he's not portrayed that way in the series. And his symbol is the trident. So if you've never seen a trident before, think giant pitchfork. As the god of the sea and son of Kronos, he's one of the most powerful gods, which could be either good or bad in mythology depending on whether you're on his good side. He was in an ongoing feud with Athena, firstly over the city of Athens, which he wanted to be the patron of himself, and later for ruining the purity of the priestess Medusa, who Athena then turned into a monster. A gorgon, actually, as punishment. Okay, it physically pains me to bring up all these awesome side stories and not have time to talk about them, but it's okay, another episode. Anyway, the last thing is that Poseidon is the father of Triton, who also carries a trident. So technically, Ariel and Hercules are cousins if we go the Disney route, since Hercules is the son of Zeus. Okay, up next is Dionysus, god of wine, fertility, and theater. And as I mentioned earlier, he also controls the satyrs. In the series, he's the head of Camp Half-Blood and kind of a jerk, but that's probably because he's a recovering alcoholic. Zeus won't let him drink anymore, and he is not okay. But in terms of the mythology, his biggest claim to fame is probably that he's the one that gave King Midas his golden touch. Next, we have Ares, god of war, and also son of Zeus and Hera. He represents the uncontrollable anger and bloodlust of war, as opposed to Athena, who represents strategy. And remember in the book, Percy struggles to control his temper when Ares is present. Just being near him makes him angry and aggressive. He's also the one who conspires to steal the lightning bolt and trick Percy into giving it to Kronos. So he's not well liked and honestly doesn't play a huge role in Greek mythology from what I could see. Speaking of Athena, she is the goddess of wisdom, arts, literature, and warfare. But again, strategic warfare. And we see her traits pretty strongly in Annabeth in the books. As a daughter of Athena, she's usually the brains of the operation, and she always has a plan. Athena is the daughter of Zeus and apparently his favorite child, but she has no mother. She's supposed to have sprang from his head one day, fully grown and wearing armor. She's also responsible for the existence of spiders. She turned a weaver called Arachne into one after she caught her bad-mouthing the gods. As the goddess of wisdom, her symbol is an owl. Up next is Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Honestly, her biggest claim to fame is the story of the seasons. After Hades abducted her daughter Persephone and took her into the underworld, Demeter was distraught with grief, and the earth became barren from neglect. So it's said that the winter was a reflection of Demeter's emotional state during Persephone's disappearance. Ultimately, Zeus sent Hermes to go get her back, and Hades agreed to allow Persephone to spend half the year with her mother, which is why we have spring and summer. And last but not least, we have Hades. He's technically not one of the 12 Olympians since he doesn't live on Mount Olympus, but he's still a son of Kronos and one of the big three most powerful gods. He's the god of the underworld, the dead, and riches. And his helm of darkness, his helmet, is the other master weapon that Ares tries to steal to start a war. So he's most well known for his three-headed dog, Cerberus, who guards the underworld, also known as Fluffy in the Harry Potter series. And, as we just talked about, he's the reason we have seasons. Everything else he does is really just standard Lord of the Underworld stuff. Whew, okay, I feel like that was a lot, but that's what makes Greek mythology so incredibly cool. And I'm not even done. So we're going to split this episode into 2 parts, just so we can get through the remaining Olympians and everything they've done. But for now, we have our intro into the world of Percy Jackson and the gods who look over Camp Half-Blood on the Long Island Sound. If you like the show and want to hear more, make sure you subscribe and leave a review. You can find me on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. And don't forget to check me out on Instagram and Facebook at Enchanted Ink Podcast, Twitter at Enchanted Ink Pod, and our home on the web, enchantedinkpodcast.com. See you next time.